From 1977 to 1984, the Hells Angels and the Outlaws Motorcycle Club fought what came to be known in Canada as the First Biker War. However, the first large conflict between bikers in Canada was the Satan's Choice, Popeye's War, which occurred from 1974 to 1976. Nevertheless, the war between Hells Angels and Outlaws has been dubbed the First Canadian Biker War, so I'm gonna refer to it as that in this presentation. This is Biker History with Magnus. The Outlaws allied themselves with the largest motorcycle club in Canada, Satan's Choice, in 1974, leading to a situation where the Outlaws challenged the supremacy of the Hells Angels' influence in Quebec. This led the Montreal chapter and their outlaw allies into open conflict with the Hells Angels-backed Popeye Moto Club, resulting in a number of casualties on both sides, in what would come to be known as the Satan's Choice, Popeye's War. Both clubs sought to expand into Canada, with the Outlaws arriving a few months before the Hells Angels in 1977. The first seed to this conflict had been planted already in 1976, when the leader of the Satan's Choice, Bernie Guindon, was sent to prison for narcotics charges. Something that would lead to the fracturing of Satan's Choice. The year after, the Outlaws expanded into Canada, and the Ottawa, St. Catharines, Windsor, and Montreal chapters left Satan's Choice and became Outlaws members. This happened when Garnet McEwen called a secret meeting with most of the chapter presidents being present, where he called for a patching over to the Outlaws, arguing that being members of an American-based club would add to their power, saying that the St. Catharines and Windsor chapters had already decided to join the Outlaws. The chapter presidents known to be loyal to the arrested Guindon were not invited to the meeting. Hells Angels expanded into Canada shortly after Outlaws, when they patched over the second largest motorcycle club in Canada, the Popeye Moto Club, which they had been scouting for years, as it was known as the most notorious and violent motorcycle club in Canada. Tensions between the two groups in Ontario and Quebec began almost immediately, with small scuffles and incidences at the end of 1977. In February, a chapter of the Montreal Rockers MC became the second Quebec chapter of the Outlaws. The same month, Hells Angels member Yves Apache Trudeau shot and killed a member of the Outlaws, Robert Cote, and wounded another in Montreal. This was the beginning of the war between the two clubs. Yves Trudeau was the club's leading assassin and a major participant in multiple biker conflicts throughout Canadian history. He became a crown witness after the Lennoxville massacre. In exchange, he received a lenient sentence, life in prison but eligible for parole after 7 years, for the killing of no less than 43 people, from 1970 to 1985.
Hold on to your butts.
Because now it's getting messy. In March, a bomb placed under the car of Outlaws chapter president, Gilles Carteret, exploded in front of a bar on Bordeaux Street in Montreal. Carteret was killed instantly and several others were injured by debris from the explosion. On April 25, 1978, Dennis LeCure Kennedy and another Hells Angel entered the Outlaw Clubhouse at 144 Rue Saint-Ferdinand, and went on a shooting rampage. Although no one was killed, a number of outlaws were wounded. On April 26 of the same year, Athanasi Tom Thumb Markopoulos, a member of the Outlaws, was murdered by two Hells Angels members. And the day after, another Angel shot and badly wounded Outlaws member Francois Policino and his girlfriend. Witnesses described the gunman who shot Policino and Harvey as leaving in a green car, which the police found parked outside of the Angels clubhouse. Ballistic tests showed that the bullets fired in the Industrial Brasserie shooting were from the same handgun used in the attack at the Outlaws clubhouse. As a consequence of this blunder, Buteau changed the rules, ordering that henceforward, Angels were to leave their guns at the scene of the crime, in order to reduce the chances of the police being able to tie together crimes. 2 weeks later the Outlaws struck back and shot René Canis, a bear of Hells Angels. He was wounded, his arm being grazed in a drive-by shooting outside the Angels Montreal clubhouse. In late May, Jean Gonlier, an associate of the Outlaws, was beaten to death by Paul Ringett, an associate of the Hells Angels. In October, Walter Stadnick, then president of the Wild Ones MC in Ontario, traveled to Montreal to make contact with Yves Buteau, the national president of Hells Angels Canada, to discuss having the Wild Ones patch over to become the first Hells Angels chapter in Ontario. The Outlaws saw the possibility of a Hells Angel chapter being established in Ontario by way of the Wild Ones as a threat. In October, 2 American outlaws and members of the Wild Ones entered Le Tourbillon after following the Angels. One Angel, Louis Lapierre, rose to confront the 2 American outlaws, but was gunned down when the 2 outlaws started shooting, killing 1 Angel and severely wounding 2 others. 2 Wild Ones members were also killed, but Stadnick survived by hiding under the table. Buteau learned that the man who hired the 2 American outlaws was Roland de Temple, of the Outlaw Montreal chapter, and sent ace assassin Yves Trudeau to kill him. However, it wouldn't be until March 29, 1979 that the deed would be complete, with de Temple being killed by a car bomb. These events would cause the conflict to spread into the province of Ontario. Detective John Gordon Harris of the Hamilton Police told the journalist Jerry Langton,
"As soon as the Wild Ones began to associate with the Hells Angels, the Outlaws told them they shouldn't do that. And they probably shouldn't have, as it led to several deaths."
The Hamilton chapter of the Outlaws started killing the Wild Ones, which led to the disbanding of the Wild Ones, after 5 members were killed, and others seriously wounded. When Stadnick returned from Montreal, he found his club had voted themselves out of existence, but Stadnick chose to continue as a Hells Angel, operating in Montreal and Hamilton. In November, Yves Trudeau struck again, and shot former Outlaw President Brian Powers, and in December, he gunned down the biker William Weichelt, whom he accidentally mistook for an outlaw. Later, a member of the Outlaws, who was guarding the body of Ziggy Wiseman, was killed by the police. On March 29, 1979, Yves Trudeau destroyed the car of Roland de Temple, an outlaw's informant, with explosives. 5 days later he also kills Robert Lebel, a narcotics trafficker and the former president of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, who had patched over to the Outlaws. In May, the Hells Angels members, Yves Buteau, Jean-Pierre Mathieu and Yves Trudeau, murdered Donald McLean, a member of the Outlaws, as well as his girlfriend, Carmen Pish. They were killed by an explosive that was attached to McLean's motorcycle. In September, Trudeau and others gained permission to form the Montreal North chapter. This chapter would become known for its violent, reckless behavior and excessive drug use. Most of the members in the new chapter were mostly former Popeyes, and still retained the Popeye attitudes. This notorious behavior would come to cause problems for the Montreal North chapter, leading to an event that would be known as the Lennoxville Massacre. More on that later. Media attention for 1980 was relatively low in comparison to previous years. However, several brawls and attacks using Molotov cocktails and explosives had occurred throughout the year, costing both clubs significant losses in property and income. By late 1980, it was estimated by authorities that the Angels' outlaw biker war had been responsible for between 20 and 30 murders in Quebec and Ontario. On March 14, 1981, Yves Trudeau placed a bomb in the vehicle of an associate of the Outlaws, Robert Morin, instantly killing him. This year would see a slight rest in the conflict as both sides regained their strength and footing. In January 1982, Trudeau killed Charlie Hatches and another Angel from the Laval chapter. Both had heavy drug problems, had planned to kidnap Frank Ryan's kids, a man they got most of their drugs from, and Hatches owed him $150,000 in drug money. When Ryan learned about the kidnapping plot, he told the Hells Angels that they either liquidate those involved, or be cut off from the drugs he sold them. Hells Angels managed to lure Hatches to a meeting, where he was killed, and his body dumped in the St. Lawrence River. The year ended with more violence between the two groups, something that resulted in several more deaths. Trudeau continued his killing spree, and his next victim was Michel Desormiers, who was the brother-in-law of the Catroni crime family mob boss, Frank Catroni. Not even the mafia were safe from Trudeau. In September, Yves Buteau and René Lamoureux were at Le Petit Bourg Bar, talking to Guy Frenchy Gilbert, a member of Satan's Choice MC. Gino Goudreau, brother to an Outlaws member in Quebec, was waiting outside the bar when Buteau, Lamoureux, and Gilbert left the bar. When he saw them, he took out his pistol and emptied the magazine on the three men. Yves Buteau was hit twice in the chest and died immediately, along with Gilbert, who died shortly after. René Lamoureux survived the shooting with serious injuries. After being arrested a few months later, Goudreau claimed self-defense and said that Yves Buteau had threatened him on many occasions. Buteau had also pulled a gun, but Goudreau said he was faster. The self-defense claim worked, and he was acquitted of murder. While out riding, members of Outlaws spotted two Hells Angels members from Montreal, Michel Jinx Geneste and Jean-Marc Nadeau, on a bus to Vancouver. Mario Parente and the other outlaws that were with him laid an ambush and started firing at the bus when it stopped in Wawa. However, no one was killed in the shooting incident. Parente, who has been an outlaw biker since age 18, would leave Outlaws in 2009, saying he felt profoundly let down by many of his former clubmates during his prolonged court battle. Parente said he sold everything he owned to fight the charges, and that the other outlaws were out partying and didn't donate a dime to help out. Saying he didn't get any money or support to fight something that implicated everybody. In September 1983, a funeral procession was held for Yves Buteau that included over 2,000 supporters and 150 members of the Hells Angels from North America and Europe. The day after the funeral, a young boy discovered a bomb on the route the funeral procession had gone past. Police theorized that it had been placed and camouflaged the night before the funeral, in an attempt to kill Hells Angels bikers, but that it had failed to explode. In March 1984, Bernard Savoy, the brother and right-hand man of the Outlaw Montreal chapter president, Daniel Savoy, was killed by a bomb planted in his car. The last violent incident in the war happened in May, when two Outlaws members were assassinated while riding their motorcycles. The gunmen had fired their guns at them while riding, and quickly disappeared on motorbikes. Hells Angels had dealt major damage to the Montreal chapters of the Outlaws, and the conflict came to an end with the Outlaws pulling back to their power base in Ontario. The North chapter of Hells Angels, who had broken Buteau's rules about not using drugs, quickly spun out of control with their Popeye attitude, becoming too wild, even for Hells Angels. In March 1985, at a secret meeting in Sorel, the Montreal North chapter were declared to be in bad standing with the club. It was decided that 2 members of the North chapter were to be forced into retirement, another 2 members were to be given a chance to join the South chapter, and the rest was sentenced to be killed. The plan was devised by Lassard, Carroll and Beaulieu, and they wanted Trudeau and another member dead. Robert T. Mager Richard, the sergeant-at-arms of the South chapter, announced that a party would be held at the Sherbrooke chapter clubhouse on Saturday, March 23, to be attended by the Sorel, Laval, Halifax and Sherbrooke chapters, which were all of the Angels chapters in eastern Canada at the time. Most of the North chapter now appeared, with the notable exceptions of Trudeau and Michel Jinx Geneste. VO and 4 of the North chapter members, Jean-Guy Geoffrion, Jean-Pierre Mathieu, Michel Mayrand, and Guy Louis Adam, attended. The 5 men were ambushed when they arrived. Lassard, and 41 other bikers under his command, forced them into the center of a room in the clubhouse, where they were massacred. 3 other members of the North chapter that was present were not attacked, but were ordered to remove the bodies and wash away the blood. Trudeau was supposed to be at that meeting, but had enrolled in a detox program the week before. He later said he wanted to clean himself up, because he knew what happened to members who were always high. Trudeau soon learned of the massacre and knew he was living on borrowed time. The Hells Angels had taken out a $50,000 contract on his head, and he now decided to become a police informant and government witness. Several members of the Hells Angels were present and played a role in the slaughter, but only 4 were convicted of first-degree murder, the others were convicted of lesser-related crimes. During the trial, Trudeau admitted to killing 43 people between September 1973 and July 1985. He pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter, not murder, meaning that as far as the Crown was concerned, Trudeau did not intentionally kill his 43 victims, 29 of whom died from firearms, 10 from bombs, 3 from being beaten to death, and 1 from strangulation. The police estimated that 30 to 35 of his victims were other motorcycle gang members or sympathizers. Trudeau also testified on 40 other murders and 15 attempted murders. As part of his controversial deal with the government, Trudeau was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after only 7 years. Trudeau was granted parole in 1994 and given a new identity. Under this deal, the government also gave him $40,000 over the next 4 years, and about $35 a week for cigarettes. However, Trudeau soon slid back into cocaine addiction, and sexually assaulted a 13-year-old boy. He pleaded guilty in 2004 and was sentenced to a 4-year prison term. Trudeau returned to prison under the double stigma of being both an informant and a child molester, the lowest of the low in prison, which meant that he had to be kept in isolation 23 hours a day. He died of cancer in 2008. During the biker war between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws, Trudeau killed 18 out of the 23 outlaws slain during the conflict. The prosecutor called Trudeau a psychopathic killer and a killing machine.
Par excellence.
In total, it's estimated that up to 72 people died as a result of the conflict, over 100 were injured, and more than 50 people had been arrested and convicted. The Angels emerged victorious, and as the Outlaws retreated into Ontario, the Angels began consolidating their activities and expanding, moving into port cities Halifax, Nova Scotia and Vancouver. The war between the two clubs now ended, but would reignite in 1989, and evolve into the Quebec Biker War, between Hells Angels and Rock Machine, the biggest and most deadly biker war in history. If you think I should make a video about that, please let me know in the comments section below. I hope you found this presentation interesting.
That was great.
And if you did, please smash the like and subscribe buttons as if you were a Viking berserker. I cover a lot of historical topics here on my channel, so check out my other videos to see if there are others you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.